Hi, everyone. Yes, let's start our third panel and the last one of this afternoon. My name is Roseli Rojo, and I am an assistant professor of Caribbean Studies at SUNY Oswego. And it is a pleasure to be here today with these colleagues. And first of all, I want to thank Reynaldo, Juan, and Justo for making this event possible. It is my pleasure to introduce the panel devoted to marginalized music and cinema. We will follow the order of the program that we already have. So, and I would like to remind everyone that we will have 15 minutes for our presentations, and then we will take the questions at the end of the session. So we will have more time for the conversation and the comments about the debate that we will have to have. Our first panelist is Justo Planas. He's an assistant professor of Spanish and endowed professor for the study of the Americas in the Department of World Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at Lemoyne College. He's also a doctor in Latin American, Iberian, and Latino cultures from the City University of New York, and he holds a master's degree in Latin American studies from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Yeah. He's the author of the Latin American Cinema of Disenchantment from 2018, and the peer-reviewed volume, Disseminated Island, Essays on Cuba from 2022. His articles have been published in journals across the Americas and Europe, including Crossroads of Change, Afro-Cuban Meanings of Cambio in the Music and Videos of X. Alfonso, published recently by the Journal of Latin American Cultural Studies. And today, he will be presenting Vampires in Havana and the Politics of Dance Music in Cuba Cinema. The floor is all yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. My presentation will focus on the animated film Vampires in Havana. As Roseli said, it's a film made in Cuba in 1985, which is one of Latin America's best-known animated films. The film won the Special Jury Prize at the Annecy Festival, one of the most important awards for animated films. And over the years, Vampires in Havana has gained cult status within Cuba and abroad. Given that the protagonist of the film, Pepe, is a musician and a trumpet player, and his musical performance was rendered by Arturo Sandoval, an influential jazz trumpeter, I will explore the role of music in the film. I find it particularly interesting how Vampires in Havana repositions dance music and the musical within Cuban cinema. And after describing the plot of the movie and its social context, I will go over some important events in the history of Cuban cinema during the first decades of the Cuban Revolution, in which the presence of dance music plays a critical role. Later, I will discuss how music serves in Vampires in Havana to define Cuban culture before Western powers and helps make the film a political satire of the Cold War. The sound is too low. Vampires in Havana takes place in 1933 when the protagonist's uncle, who's the son of Dracula, finally announces that he has created a formula that allows vampires to walk freely in the sunlight without harm. The discovery of the formula attracts two rival groups. On the one hand, there is the vampire mafia based in Chicago, who sees it as a threat to their business of indoor water parks and cabarets for vampires. And on the other hand, there is the European Vampire Organization, which seeks to monopolize the formula and profit from it. The year 1933 is particularly significant for both regions. In Germany, Pepe, the main character, and his uncle come from, the parliament grants Adolf Hitler the power to create laws without their approval or the approval of the president, which is a foundational moment of Hitler's dictatorship. And in the United States, the end of alcohol prohibition forces organized crime to find other illegal activities to remain in operation. including the Cosa Nostra in Chicago, which is parodied in Vampires in Havana. However, Pepito, the main character, is unaware of all of this and does not know his origins as a German vampire and grandson of Dracula. Growing up in Havana and regularly taking his uncle's formula, he has the chance to live like an ordinary Cuban. And like many others in the 1930s, he becomes involved in underground movements and rebel groups fighting to overthrow the dictatorship of Gerardo Machado. And so Pepe and his friends find themselves at the center of both national and international conflicts as the vampire mafia from Chicago and the European vampires arrive in Havana to seize the formula. Pepe's knowledge of Cuban dance music allows him to outsmart these opposing forces. During the first 25 years of the Cuban Revolution, it is difficult to find a film like Vampires in Havana that positions dance music as a driving force of social transformation. On the contrary, as cinema becomes a key cultural branch of the revolution, dance music, particularly Afro-Cuban rhythms and film musicals, tend to be represented as an unwanted or even alienating influence in different movies. From the very start of the revolution's film institute known as ICAIC, dance music and musicals were seen as not exactly fitting the image of the new Cuban society. When the release of the first film of the ICAI, Cuba Dances, was put on hold because the leaders did not think it was the right kind of movie to launch the cinema of the revolution. Another significant example is the documentary PM, which you can see here, PM, produced by a group of socialist intellectuals and artists who were regarded at the time as representing a divergent current within the new Cuban society. This 12-minute black and white documentary captures Havana's nightlife as a kind of a poetic subject with a handheld camera and in tune with the style of cinema verite. Not only did PM's playful and carefree characters clash with the tone of heroism and sacrifice that dominated most documentaries produced by the Cuban Film Institute at the time, but such frivolity was also regarded as politically inappropriate, since PM was filmed in early 1961, just before and during the tense atmosphere of the Bay of Pigs invasion, led by a group of Cuban exiles and sponsored by the CIA. As the revolution set in motion deep transformations in Cuban society, especially those aimed at often forgotten and marginalized groups, the representation of music in some films revealed the tensions between the predominantly urban and white leadership of the revolution and the Afro-descendant and rural populations they sought to influence. For example, the film One Way or Another, de cierta manera, juxtaposes fiction and documentary segments to explore the reform of a marginalized neighborhood in Havana where the revolution's opportunity for education and employment stand in direct contrast to Afro-Cuban religious and cultural practices associated with the old times. The director, Sara Gomez, who was trained as a classical pianist before becoming a filmmaker, pays particular attention to music as a sign of that transition from marginalized to revolutionary subject. And so, if Afro-Cuban songs and dances, visually paired with sacrificed animals and religious rituals, are symptomatic of the old times, one of the reformed characters in the film is shown playing a trova song on his guitar, a more educated genre and a more fitting instrument for the new times. A similar opposition between the revolutionary subject and the music and dance of marginalized groups can be seen in this film, the 1977 film, The Teacher, El Brigadista, which narrates the literacy campaign launched by the revolution in 1961 that practically eliminated illiteracy in a country where almost half of the rural population could not read or write. As the teacher, an urban, white, well-educated young man embodied the revolutionary subject the community of charcoal burners from a long-forgotten and isolated rural region became the objects of reform, a group that is for the most part welcoming and eager to learn from the teenager turned teacher, as much as some of their cultural practices create spaces of indiscipline and resistance. For example, in this sequence, a sequence that is presented as a didactic illustration of how these rural populations were transformed, the peasants decide to go dancing instead of attending class. And after the teacher and one of the community leaders intervene, the music and the party come to an end and everyone returns to the classroom. While the sporadic Cuban films produced before the revolution were for the most part musicals centered on the kind of entertainment foreign tourists sought in the cabarets of Havana, the new revolutionary cinema broke away from those representations, often portraying the dance and music of marginalized groups as cultural residues of the past that would eventually disappear with the transformation led by the new socialist government. A vampire fiction centered on a trumpeter stands out as a strange universe within a film landscape deeply influenced by Italian neorealism and in clear opposition to the so-called bourgeois hedonism and futility. And so, director Juan Padrón could only materialize his project about vampires in Havana after gaining both political and artistic prestige with other animations. Vampirism in the film serves as a metaphor for capitalism. It's a metaphor that Karl Marx uses in El Capital. The story begins when the inventor of a formula that allows vampires to walk freely in the sunlight decides to give it away for free to all vampires around the world, while the European vampires seek to profit from it, and the American vampires aim to destroy it to keep the indoor beaches in business. So these vampire groups not only feed on blood, but also seek to reproduce the logic of capitalism by feeding on the scientist's labor and turning his invention into a money-making commodity rather than a universal good. Being a vampire also represents foreign identity. While Cubans are portrayed as ordinary people, this not only reflects on the predatory history of foreign powers over the island, but also on an existential level presents certain typically Cuban behaviors as markers of humanness. The protagonist, after discovering his German and vampiric origins, for example, cannot fully turn into a vampire, as his deep connection to Cuban life keeps him human. Music is one of the central elements that keeps Pepito rooted in his Cubanness. It is a shared passion among his friends and a tool he uses in his political activism. Through music, he also dreams of the family he will build with his girlfriend. With Pepe's activism, music and dance have been central to the cultural and political action of marginalized groups on the island and have long been feared and stigmatized by the ruling class. In Vampires in Havana, the presence of dance music in every aspect of Cuban life is the one thing that the foreign invaders did not consider in their plans to obtain the formula. Director Juan Padrón turns this into a comedic motive that keeps decimating the vampire characters who seem both unwilling and unable to follow the rhythm of the Caribbean city. While in other films of the period, dance music functions as an alienating force that keeps subaltern individuals trapped in the past, in Vampires in Havana, it becomes the very substance of Cuban humanness. If in elitist accounts of the Cuban condition, dance music often epitomized the hedonism and complacency that held the country back in the race for economic power, in this animated film, it is what protects its people from the devouring forces of the existing world order. This is my last page. even though animated films has long been seen as something for kids, and despite being at odds with the aesthetics of the so-called Cuban revolutionary cinema, Vampires in Havana soon became one of the most watched and rewatched films in Cuba. This not only had to do with what Dian Luis Reyes calls the soft ethnocentrism of the film, that is the celebratory quality in the film of all things Cuban without falling into supremacist nationalism. But the popularity of this movie, not just in Cuba, but across Latin America and the Caribbean, also has to do with its cathartic effect. The film's climax reenacts an all too familiar scenario as the protagonist is cut between the European and American vampires, both of whom seem far too powerful to confront. Like Pepe and his friends, Cuba's very existence, and these are just examples that apply to most Latin America, Cuba's very existence was on the line during the missile crisis of 1962 between the two superpowers of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union. And despite being the ground zero in a potential nuclear exchange, the Caribbean country was excluded from the negotiations that led to the Hotline Agreement. This exclusion deepened the open wound of the 1898 Treaty of Paris, where Madrid and Washington decided the fate of the island, along with the possession of Puerto Rico and the Philippines after 30 years of wars waged by Cubans. In the context of the Cold War and beyond, Vampires in Havana offers a fictional release for Cubans and Latin American spectators caught up in the conflict between First and Second World powers. The foreign vampires killed Pepe's uncle, destroyed his house, and burned the document with a formula, but they did not expect that Pepe had already turned the recipe into a song. And as he performs it for free before the worldwide audience of a vampire radio station, not only does his Cuban side reconcile with his vampirism, but dance music also reclaims center stage in Cuban cinema. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justo, for your presentation. Our next panelist is Carrie Peñate. She's a film musicologist who specializes on depictions of Afro-Cuban dance music in cinema from Latin America and the United States, particularly on intersections between popular culture, politics, and commerce. She teaches at Syracuse University and received her PhD from University of Texas at Austin in May 2021. Her current book project, Scoring the Cuban Mulata, Music, Film, and Transnational Constructions of Race and Gender, investigates representations of the Cuban mulata, a mixed race woman of black, white, and sometimes indigenous heritage, in international cinematic productions from the mid-20th century. Written English and Spanish language scholarship, her work complicates U.S. racial ideologies by examining the dark figures who mediate musical and racial mixture for dominant society. Carrie will be presenting Marketing the Tropics, musical jingles, and the ideological image of the United Fruit Company. Go ahead.
Thank you. Everybody can hear me? Yeah. Well, as you can see, I changed my title, but I'm still speaking about musical jingles nonetheless. So very grateful to be here with you today. Thank you to Juan, to Reynaldo, and Justo for inviting me. It's been very nice to see how all the panels have come together, and I feel like I could have been placed in any of the panels so far. So my paper is titled Marketing the Tropics, Musical Jingles, and the Ideological Image of the United Fruit Company. As you can see, it's not really dealing with any film in particular, but with the music of a commercial. The United Fruit Company released its famous Chiquita Banana commercial in 1944. Accompanied by a pseudo-calypso song, the banana character appears dressed in a Carmen Miranda-inspired outfit, complete with a flower-laden hat, a long red skirt, and a vest that reveals her torso and midriff. The lyrics and visuals provide step-by-step guidelines for how to use bananas in everyday life, practices that today seem commonplace in the household kitchen. What now appears obvious does reflect a moment when bananas still required instruction, spectacle, and repetition to become a common American staple. The song's popularity attests to the involvement of the United Fruit Company in the Good Neighbor policy of the World War II, with its opening of the Middle American Information Bureau to promote Latin American consumer products for the war effort. This paper explores the role that the Chiquita Banana commercial jingle played in the mainstream acceptance of tropical fruits imported from Latin America and the Caribbean during World War II. I argue that music has historically played an important role in the increasing visibility and branding of the banana in the United States. So without further ado, I'll just play the commercial for you.
I'm Chiquita Banana and I've come to say bananas have to ripen in a certain way, and when they're flecked with brown and have a golden hue, bananas taste the best and are the best for you. You can put them in a salad. Great? No, not yet, my dear. That greenish way you're looking means that you are ripe for cooking.
How about me?
No, when you are fully ripe, my dear, those little flecks of brown appear.
Me?
You're most digestible, my friend, delicious too from end to end. You can put them in a pie, any way you want to eat them. It's impossible to beat them, but bananas like the climate of the very, very tropical equator. So you should never put bananas in the refrigerator. Bananas are a solid food that doctors now include in baby's diet. And since they are so good for baby, I think we all should try it. Oh! See?
Okay, so the manifold significations attached to the Chiquita banana, sexuality, tropicality, leisure, nutrition, hygiene, safety, childlike innocence, maybe motherhood, right? Availability, abundance, they all function ideologically to conceal the violent histories and exploitative practices through which the industry has generated profit. Aligning closely with the figure of the 1940s middle-class housewife, the commercial capitalizes on domestic ideals of care, nutrition, and efficiency, positioning the banana as a convenient, health-giving commodity while reinforcing gendered expectations of consumption and household management. Shayna Klein notes that as housemakers whose selection and preparation of food was thought to define the character of the American family and larger national citizenry, housewives were responsible for creating a stable home free of alien influences. With foods such as the banana that were still considered unfamiliar in the last decades of the 19th century, housewives helped integrate them into North American homes by incorporating the fruit into such recipes as ham rolls, fritters, salads, banana trifle, and the banana jello, end quote. The United Fruit Company published numerous cookbooks and recipe pamphlets geared towards women in the 1930s and 40s, instructing consumers on how to incorporate bananas into everyday meals. These culinary materials further emphasized the fruit's purported health benefits, promoting it as a remedy for digestive ailments, fatigue, and general malnutrition, thereby reinforcing its image as both a practical and quasi-medicinal commodity. In the Food Value of the Banana, published in 1928, for instance, the United Fruit Company states the banana is of therapeutic value in scurvy and celiac disease. Behind the practical instructions for consuming bananas, the music itself generates mythic signification that frames the Caribbean and tropicality as utopian or as an ephemeral place. It grants the banana a symbolic connotation, presenting it as a magical and exotic fruit capable of healing infirmities and promoting a healthy lifestyle. The cartoon also evokes a visual and stylistic resemblance to Disney characters of the time, which similarly portrayed Latin America as a friendly and harmonious region. For instance, José Carioca embodies the melodious qualities of samba in Saludos Amigos, followed by a shadow-like Carmen Miranda performing Aquarela do Brasil by Ari Barroso, a song that had a key role in the U.S.'s amiable relationship with Brazil during World War II. I'll play a little bit of this clip.
Não, cachaça? Que tal uma cachaçinha agora, hein? Saúde! Muito obrigado. Donna, now you have the spirit of the samba.
In another scene of the film, Goofy appears as El Gaucho Goofy, dancing the Argentine folk dance of the chacarera. Although Chiquita Banana shows similarity to these cartoon characters, the most striking resemblance is shown to Carmen Miranda's choreography in The Gang's All Here from 1943, just 1 year prior to the commercial, where she appears in a banana and strawberry costume among other dancers in a large-scale choreography by Busby Berkeley.
Brazilian senoritas, they are sweet and shy. They dance and play together when the sun is high. But when the tropic moon is in the sky, they have a different kind of time, and even I forget that I'm the lady in the tutti-frutti hat.
And I would argue that even Carmen Miranda comes across as a cartoon-like character in her film performances. Although the persistent tendency of Hollywood and the US to depict Latin American through cartoon-like figures reveals the industry's complicity in producing shallow images of the region as fun, touristic destination. Historian John Saluri notes that the banana character helped familiarize the foreign banana to US audiences by bringing a non-threatening form of tropical exoticism to North America. Like these animated figures, the Chiquita Banana character contributes to a mythic aura grounded in the expressive rather than the strictly semiotic dimensions of the musical code. Though most scholars have focused on the exploitative practices of the United Fruit Company, drawing on archival materials to examine agricultural operations, infrastructure, transportation networks, and company life, I instead foreground the role of the musical jingle in shaping the company's public image among US consumers. Following the premiere of the 1944 commercial, the jingle became a wide popular radio hit, airing up to 376 times per day across the country. Time magazine verifies the song and Chiquita Banana's widespread influence by noting most spot commercials are either obnoxious or vapid. Chiquita Banana, sung to a catchy calypso-style tune, is so different that listeners actually like it. Last week, after more than 8 months on the air, it had become the undisputed #1 on the Jingle Jangle hit parade. Its composers Garth Montgomery and Len McKenzie, not unmindful of the famed banana smash of the early 1920s, decided to doll up their lyrics and give them a try as a popular song. 5 years later, the magazine would again emphasize the song's lasting popularity. For nearly 6 years on the radio, United Fruit Company's Chiquita Banana has admonished millions of US citizens never to put bananas in the refrigerator. Over the decades, the United Fruit Company later to be known as the United Brands Company in 1970, and then Chiquita International, Banana International in 1984, would continue to release different adaptations of the song for their commercials. The pseudo-calypso accompaniment to Chiquita Banana's voice points to the Caribbean as an imagined center of origin for the fruit. Although the Windward Islands, especially Jamaica, play a far more significant role in banana exportation through the 20th century, Trinidad and Tobago, the birthplace of calypso, did not figure as prominently within the industry, accounting only a marginal share of the production and export. The genre is characterized by a syncopated rhythm that structures most of the song's melodies, along with saxophone, guitar, double bass, congas, maraca, and piano. In the case of the commercial, Len McKenzie plays the piano, and the maraca part is actually done with paper clips in a Dixie plastic cup. The Chiquita jingle, likewise, as you can see behind me, uses a rhythmic melodic frame with the jazzy central voice of Patty Clayton on your left, I guess? Yes, on your left, in this original 1944 rendition. Starting from 1947 until 1961, Monica Lewis would take over the voice of Chiquita Banana. The white actresses behind the voice reflects a process of whitening, whereby Caribbean musical culture is mediated through jazz and mainstream US popular styles to make them legible and palatable to the crooning tastes of white middle-class audiences. Yet the rhythmic inflection of the Trinidadian calypso showcases the music industry's broader practice of spicing up songs with syncopated rhythms, which were frequently labeled generically as rumbas throughout the 30s and 40s. The rumba craze of the period often blurred nationalistic dance forms, collapsing them into a single, undifferentiated category of Latin music, compositions that Gustavo Perez Fermat has labeled as Latunes. Yet, as noted earlier, the company made a deliberate effort to present the song specifically as a calypso, rather than a generic rumba, signaling a comparatively heightened attention to musical stylistic distinctions that came along with the cultural diplomacy of the Good Neighbor policy. Although Chiquita Banana's image began to fade after about 1960 with the dismantling of the United Fruit Company, her song continued to play in commercial jingles throughout the decades. The echoes of her song lost its instructive undertones as the banana became ubiquitous, but they still continued to play in the consumer's consciousness, while hiding the harsh history of its cultivation in the Latin America and the Caribbean, but still referencing a general atmosphere of the tropics through its music and visual component of the Chiquita Banana character. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Our next presenter is Juan Carlos Rodriguez. He is an associate professor of Spanish at Georgia Tech and co-director of the Atlanta Global Studies Center. And he has co-edited the collections of essays, New Documentaries in Latin America, Palgrave 2014, and Digital Humanities in Latin America, University Press of Florida in 2020. He's also co-editing a book series, Reframing Media, Technology, and Cultural in Latin American for the University of Florida Press, and his research focuses on Latin American documentaries from perspectives informed by sustainability, critical theory, urban and environmental humanities, and digital humanities as well. Today, he will be presenting Restaging Racial Oppression, Music Responses to George Floyd's Murder in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. Thank you. There is a long tradition of representing the police in Puerto Rican music. Since its origins, urban genres like salsa and hip hop have incorporated police characters in their songs. In this presentation, I will discuss a music video created by Afro-Boricua hip hop artist Rafa Pavon that responds to the traumatic event of George Floyd's murder by restaging the violence of racial oppression as an embodied experience of policing Black bodies. In the music video Sin Aire, Pavón performs his song, a call for justice to George Floyd, while being taken to the floor by a police officer who puts his knee on the rapper's neck. Through the analysis of these and other music videos, I will examine the role of performative embodiments of racial oppression in the evolution of the police representations in Puerto Rican music. I will investigate this video as an allegory for the emergence of a new politics in Puerto Rico based on denouncing racial oppression and creating racial alliances. Like many societies in the 1980s, Puerto Rico began to suffer the impact of drug trafficking and the wave of criminal activities associated with it. The spectacular and bloody reporting of drug-related massacres in the newspaper El Vocero in the 1980s helped to create an environment of urban fear among Puerto Rican middle classes. High crime rates led to a new wave of Puerto Rican migration to the city of Orlando. For Disney Rican families, suburban housing, theme parks, malls, and access to high levels of consumption represented not only an exit from crime-ridden Puerto Rico, but also access to statehood, the Puerto Rican dream of pro-statehood elites. For the Puerto Rican elite and middle classes not yet ready to leave the island, the real estate market provided a solution: gated communities. Suburban housing was transformed into an archipelago of walled enclaves. In this culture of urban fear, it is not surprising that popular barrios and public housing projects became the target of police control and surveillance. The invasion of public housing projects by the National Guard under Governor Rafael Hernández Colón in the 1980s and later by the police in the 1990s through Pedro Rosselló's official policy Mano Dura contra el Crimen, marked a transition in urban policing that would leave deep marks in the representation of police activity in Puerto Rican music. The evolution of this culture of fear, surveillance, and policing coincided with the origins of rap music in Puerto Rico. Rap music, known at the time in Puerto Rico also as underground, emerged from popular barrios and public housing projects, and it can be interpreted, among other things, as a response to the criminalization of urban black youth. Vico C, the pioneering figure of rap en español in Puerto Rico and the world, came from the public housing project of Las Acacias located in Puerta de Tierra, a popular neighborhood just outside the San Juan colonial walls. In one of his first songs, Soy de la Calle, Vico C expresses a defiant attitude against the status quo in Puerto Rico by using bad words threatening to destroy the police, store windows, and public buses. Vico C develops a rebellious and oppositional identity by symbolizing street culture as a specific geographical network of popular barrios like Puerta de Tierra, Tras Talleres, and public housing projects like Covadonga and Los Lirios. Other early underground songs from Puerto Rico like Falo Pal Cruce and Las Guanábanas Podridas to Hell with Healthy Minds unravel this rebellious attitude through images celebrating cannabis consumption. In his song Pal Cruce, Falo chronicles his own trip to buy weed at the crossing, Pal Cruce, and how his encounter with the police turns into a crazy adventure in which he ends up smoking with the agents while discarding their weapons, badges, and shoes. On his way to buy, he recalls that in Sabana Bajo, the police is taking other teenagers and turning them around. En Sabana Bajo nos están volteando. The expression voltear refers to a typical police command: turn around and put your hands against the wall, which is evoked in the song by Las Guanábanas Podridas. It refers to a police tactic used against teens that also resembles the practice of stop and frisk as implemented in New York at the turn of the century before becoming unconstitutional in 2013. As music videos began to use to be used by underground singers, voltear, this mode of corporeal subjection became incorporated in the dramatization of the encounter between the Puerto Rican police and urban black youth. The opening sequence of the music video Señor Oficial by Eddie D shows a group of black young men being arrested by the police. After being stopped, Eddie D is thrown to the floor and is escorted from the scene in handcuffs. Then the song presents a police lineup and I got a bit lost here. Followed by a press conference in which Eddie D denounces the persecution of rappers and rap music by the police based on stereotypes and biased assumptions. Eddie D's lyrics recall what some legal scholars have called the presumption of guilt applied to black men, which transforms these subjects into targets of law enforcement while limiting their chances of a fair trial. The song came after the policing of urban music took another turn due to the moral panics created by the explicit sexual content and rebellious and oppositional attitudes expressed in underground. In 1995, the police confiscated underground recordings from 6 stores in San Juan. Along with the disciplinary measures imposed on black bodies came the policing of language and sexuality. Eddie D's song could be interpreted as a response to these moral panics and as an attempt to serve as a mediation between the rap community and the Puerto Rican mainstream. In the video, this mediation is staged as the encounter between Eddie D, representing a black man from the rappers community, and a black police agent who represents law enforcement but also Puerto Rican mainstream society. This conversation between black men and in which Eddie D tells the police agent that their differences are basically linguistic and language difference. What you call multitude, I call corillo. What you call woman, I call yale, but all are equal words. At the end of the video, they shake hands and the police agent stays silent, meditating on what he has heard. The reconciliatory tone of the song is reaffirmed by the main chorus in the song. As rappers became the target once again in 2002, when the Puerto Rican legislature tried to censor rap and reggaeton music, Eddie D came back with the song and music video Censurarme por ser rapero, criticizing the hypocrisy of the Puerto Rican government, which highlighted government corruption and racial profiling. And one of the lyrics says, "I don't care if you like me or you don't like me because my high school diploma is signed by a corrupt," which is actually true because it was signed by Victor Fajardo, who went to prison for corruption. Notice that in Puerto Rican Spanish, corrupt turned into from an adjective to a common noun. In the video, press coverage of government corruption cases and police operations is mixed with images of people with their mouths covered with tape, symbolizing the censorship of the society. Eddie D's songs belong to a hip-hop tradition in which the MC or rapper uses his platform and talent to become a voice of consciousness. In Puerto Rico, that tradition was initiated by Vico C in his song La Recta Final, whose lyrics operate as a social diagnosis, revealing patterns of social inequality, systemic oppression, and political corruption. Since many of these rap consciously songs were recorded in the pre-streaming era, there are not many videos. So Eddie D's videos are an exception to the rule. So now I'm gonna show a couple of images that are very interesting from other videos. These are images from Bandoleros. Don Omar is actually denouncing the harassment he suffered from the Puerto Rican police in the song, but the video, it's actually something else. We have to remember that in the streaming, era, music videos have become an important platform for the dissemination of songs. And also they play with ambiguity. So it is interesting that in this play of ambiguity, the soundtrack refers to a situation of police harassment, while the video refers to other situations. In this case, Don Omar is singing his song in Miami and accompanied by a sort of gospel choir, revealing the way in which he creates a sort of solidarity with this community. When we look at other videos like Tego Calderón, Robin Hood, there is also this representation of the police. Tego Calderón is talking about how he operates as a Robin Hood, but the video is actually about him saving a family of migrants from the coast and trying to transport them to the interior of the island. And then at the end of the video, we see a Border Patrol agent pointing to the family, then he recognizes the family, and then he turns his weapon down. So in a way, it's a sort of image of reconciliation or a positive, more, an image of positive representation of the police. Tiburones is a romantic song, but Ricky Martin decided to use a riot squad to represent the sharks. And in this song, Ricky appears singing to a community of people, and then the agents decided to throw their helmets to the floor, which in a way resembles some of the attitudes that we saw during the summer of 2019. And at the end, there is a celebration here in the video. So Sin Aire, it's a very interesting video because the rapper, in this case, Rafa Pavón, who happens to be the nephew of Carlos, of Puerto Rican historian Carlos Pavón, sings his song while he is having this situation of corporeal subjection, the knee on his neck, no? And in a way, he's trying to embody the situation that caused the death of George Floyd. We could also see that another rapper from the US used the same gesture. This is Da Baby Rockstar. And it's interesting that Pavón's representation came before Da Baby's representation, but when you look at the press coverage of music in solidarity of George Floyd, the image that tends to be mentioned in the US is Da Baby, not the image of Rafa Pavón. So I would like to read the conclusion very quickly. It's just a quick paragraph. Let me move quickly. I had a couple of things to say about Rafa Pavón, but I'll leave it there. By denouncing racially motivated violence in the US, Rafa Pavón opens new paths for a conversation among African Americans and Puerto Ricans about the experience of colonial, racial, and systemic violence. As an Afro-Boricua hip-hop artist, Pavón represents himself as embodying in his own skin the sufferings and traumas resulting from racial profiling and police brutality in the US and its territories. He seems to be saying police brutality is one of the legacies of colonialism, not only in the US, but also in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. Our next presenter is Héctor Fernández Laoste. He's a professor of cultural studies at Georgia State University, and he authored Narrativas de Representación Urbana, 1998, and Lalo Alcaraz, Political Cartooning in the Latino Community, from 2017, and co-edited volumes including Rocking Las Americas, Cumbia, and Internet, Humor, and Nation in Latin America from 2024. His essays appears in journals such as Hispania, National Identities, and Film Quarterly. He also co-edited 2 academic series on Latin American culture and media for University of Florida Press and Lexington Books. He has translated scholarly works into Spanish, and he is completing a monograph, Vicious Muñequitos, Nation, Neoliberalism, and Violence in Latin American Comics. Today, he will be presenting From Lo Que Vendrá, 1988, to Existir Sin Voz, 2016, Live with Charlie Garcia, or the mythologizing of national icon.
All right. First of all, thanks to Reynaldo, Justo, and Juan for the invitation, and to the College of the Holy Cross for hosting the event. So let's see. All right, cool. Born with perfect pitch and classically trained, Carlos Alberto Garcia Moreno, better known as Charlie Garcia, is undoubtedly a key figure in Latin American rock. The son of an upper-middle-class family that had fallen hard times, his father owned Argentina's first Formica furniture factory. Garcia was raised by a mother who insisted on calling him a genius, and was trained by Julieta Sandoval, a music instructor who emphasized that true artistic greatness requires suffering. In 1988, he played a nurse in Gustavo Mosquera's dystopian film Lo Que Vendrá, which depicts a neo-futuristic Argentina slipping back into repressive rule. At the time, Garcia was at the height of his creative power, having released a series of landmark solo albums including Clics Modernos, Piano Bar, and Parte de la Religión, as well as the critically acclaimed Tango with Pedro Aznar. By the summer of 1994, when Alejandro Chomsky filmed Existir Sin Voz, an hour-long documentary of a nighttime recording session with Garcia, things had changed. Garcia had undergone treatment for substance abuse twice, and would soon enter another period of psychiatric care in late 1994. His behavior grew increasingly erratic and unpredictable, culminating in the notorious leap from the 9th floor of a hotel in Mendoza into a swimming pool on March 3rd, 2000. Taken together, I argue that this film illustrates a major shift from the inspired rock star who, during the return to democracy, symbolically cares for the nation, to a figure of excess and haste that exemplifies the spirit of the 1990s, when Argentina embraced neoliberal freedom without limits. Through these 2 films, Garcia becomes a rock icon within a culture of self-mythologization, one dedicated to creating larger-than-life figures that reinforce a shared sense of worth rooted in the porteño imaginary. Cinematically, Lo Que Vendrá is not a major achievement, despite winning 3 awards from the Argentine Entertainment Journalists Association. Best Film Actor for Hugo Soto, who was riding the wave of his success with Eliseo Subiela's Hombre Mirando al Sudeste. Best Supporting Actor for Garcia, who ventured into fiction for the first time. And Best Film Director for Gustavo Mosquera, who later directed Muelle. The story is fairly straightforward. Miguel Galvan, played by Soto, arrives in Buenos Aires where he's accidentally shot by rogue police officer Moreno during a demonstration. Garcia drives Galvan to the hospital, where he lies in a catatonic state, aware of his surroundings yet unable to move or speak. The shooting sets off a chain of events, as Galvan becomes a political liability. On one side, the police try to silence witnesses. On the other, calling anonymously, Garcia threatens Morea, even going so far as to set his house on fire. Morea rushes to the hospital to get Garcia, but mistakes another nurse for them. When Galvan finally wakes up, he confronts Morea. Exposed as a witness of the repressive system, Morea is eliminated. Both Galvan and Garcia escape scot-free, one leaving the city, the other staying. Ultimately, the film hints that even darker times may be ahead. Lo que vendrá enhances Garcia's reputation as a mythic rock icon in two ways. First, it features Garcia as a nurse, a persona he explored since his 1984 album Piano Bar. I argue that the nurse figure symbolizes care for both physical and mental health, as well as concern for the nation, hinting at Argentina's collective well-being after years of military repression. Garcia serves as an emblematic nurse for the entire country, not just for Galvan. In Argentine society, where psychological discourse is mainstream, experiences like the Proceso de Reorganización Nacional undeniably cause collective trauma. Many proud Argentines would have asked themselves, in a country that gave us Borges, Cortázar, and Sabato, and produced Nobel laureates like Saavedra Lamas, José, Leloir, Pérez Esquivel, and Milstein, how did we fall into the hands of these barbarians? One can only imagine the impact this may have had on the self-esteem of many Argentines, serving as a lesson in humility. The nurse also hints at issues that would later surface in Garcia's career. In his 1984 tune, Raros Peinados Nuevos, shortly after Argentina's return to democracy on October 30 of the previous year, Garcia sings, "I no longer want to criticize, I just want to be a nurse," and concludes the song by repeating, "As a child, I was a pirate, now I'm a nurse," perhaps foreshadowing his role in Euskera film. By the time of Lo que Vendrá, the part suited him perfectly, as Garcia had been known since the 1970s for his reckless behavior and substance abuse. In the 1990s, after experiencing his first major mental crisis and being hospitalized at a clinic, Garcia briefly named his backup band Los Intermedios. In December 1991, he even arrived on stage in an ambulance for a concert at Ferro, which opened with a silent Chaplin-like video titled Enfermeros Trabajando, in an outright gesture of self-parody. Second, in the film, Garcia manages to do something very few Argentines ever accomplished: retaliate against a repressor. By 1988, Luis Puenzo's La Historia Oficial had begun to address the dictatorship's human rights abuses, yet no film had gone so far as to seek retribution directly. There is a long list of Argentine films exploring this idea, both before and after the Proceso era. Tiempo de Revancha, Últimos Días de la Víctima, La Noche de los Lápices, Un Muro de Silencio, Garaje Olimpo, Cachata, Crónica de una Fuga, El Secreto de sus Ojos, Infancia Campesina, Koblik, and Argentina, 1985. However, none is as explicit in its depiction of revenge as Lo que Vendrá, which portrays Garcia as perhaps the only Argentine ever to directly harass the repressive apparatus. The press criticized the script, but the film is a stylish portrayal of Buenos Aires. Its locations include a deserted gas station, an underpass near the obelisk, a hospital, the highway, warehouse rooftops, urban tennis courts, junkyards along rail lines, a neon-lit industrial neighborhood full of skinheads, and empty shipyards. Mosquera portrays a dystopian city controlled by an authoritarian police state and hints at the potential for increased oppression, even as Argentina's return to democracy remains fragile and new, suggesting that the return to democracy would not stop the government from using force. While Galvan's coma functions as a metaphor for silenced memory and the city as a post-traumatic landscape, Garcia's role allows him to get even with an agent of repression, not legally, but with the same forceful logic. This is especially meaningful, given that democracy was still in its early stages, but amnesty was no longer contemplated. In this context, Garcia, known for his lyrics as a champion of political resistance, is perfect for the role of a nurse, cinematically speaking, for a nation emerging from the trauma of dictatorship. The rocker's dismissive attitude towards bourgeois benediction reinforces the Argentine penchant for viveza criolla, always eager to beat the system. For many Argentines, the main regret is not having done anything. Dressed entirely in white in the film, Garcia's slim frame stands out against the backdrop of urban decay, while his inquisitive, bespectacled face topped by his two-tone mustache, adds distinctiveness. He becomes the archetype of the post-dictatorial rebel, setting an example for his fellow nationals. Through the plot, Garcia connects with the nation like many cannot. In terms of Argentinidad, this is significant, as someone is finally able to retaliate against the state, just as the state did to the population. Garcia not only flaunts extreme behavior on and off stage, but also appears glorified on screen, acting brashly, his devious gaze symbolizing his rebellious spirit as the enfant terrible of national rock, destroying stages and hotels, smashing musical instruments, and acting out before audiences or the press shows the way. Thanks to Mosquera, Garcia, well known for parading his geniality, transforms into something he rarely embraced, a role model. Though the film lacks closure, its final scene in which the rocker breaks the fourth wall with a roguish look hints that he will stay alert, offering reassurance. This may partly explain why his popularity peaked in the late 1980s. If Lo que vendrá embodies a good move, Existir sin voz is even more vital to his fame as rock icon. Imagine a 65-minute documentary created specifically to romanticize a chaotic, cognitive, overloaded, misunderstood artist. This is it. At the time, Chomsky was a young filmmaker invited to record a nocturnal rehearsal and recording session during the making of Garcia's rock opera La hija de la lágrima. Most of the documentary was shot in Chacarita, at La Fábrica, Garcia's studio at 1245 Fitzroy, which has since become a cultural center. It shows Garcia working late into the night with extended jam sessions driven by spontaneous lyrics and improvised rhythmic loops. Gone is the Garcia of the 1980s, who after demoing songs in a Manhattan loft would book time at the Village's Electric Lady studio, work with Joe Blaney for a few weeks, and produce a phenomenal album. In comparison, Existir sin voz clarifies that the songwriting process is no longer linear, but rather incoherent, frantic, and restless, including a leap into the pool in the early morning hours to calm the restlessness. The guy clearly has something for pools. The film's contribution to Garcia's mythology stems from two main aspects. First is the revelation of Garcia as a notably self-centered person, in contrast to the public rocker of the past. At the beginning of the film, we see him heading to the studio, going by a mall. When asked if he likes the mall, he says he loves it because it's closed, has everything he enjoys, and gets the job done. There is a better world, but it's more expensive, he claims. And then, why do you have money? The collectively minded Garcia, the leader of large-scale rituals and shared goals in the 70s and 80s, is gone. As he began singing in the late 80s, I don't need anyone. I don't need anyone around me, embracing an individualistic neoliberal streak and beseeching privacy. This is a completely self-absorbed man, willing to do almost anything to gain an audience, yet plagued by endless control issues. Then there's a little part I'm going to skip, and I'm just going to go to the last paragraph because I'm short on time. On the other hand, the film emphasizes the trouble artist trope, showcasing Garcia's obsessions and vulnerabilities, his intense drive to create, and his refusal to follow a set order. The film feels disorganized not because Chomsky lacks the skill or structure, but because the subject is unstable and volatile, constantly shifting focus and pace. While filming, Chomsky captures all the evidence, surrounded by guitarist Maria Gabriela Epumer, who died in 2003, bassist Alejandro Medina of Manal, keyboardist Fabián Quintiero, and drummer Fernando Samalea, who patiently endure all his quirks and whims. Garcia sometimes comes across as a diva, often as a child, and always, always as a rock star, unwilling to justify or rationalize his actions. Instead of a typical recording session, the film feels like a group of friends hanging out all night until everyone, except the protagonist, is completely and utterly exhausted, including the audience. At the same time, the film offers a brutally honest portrayal of a genius. For Garcia, it seems there are no limits to filming. Everything appears to confirm his exceptional nature in an almost inexplicable way. Chomsky even includes a frame in which he explains that during one of the 10 shows in Buenos Aires' Grand Rex Theater, where the music from the film session premiered, Garcia destroyed the camera used to shoot the film. Its final images show an intoxicated Garcia, a shadow of his former self, with his hair dyed like Kurt Cobain's. Swinging his head before the grand piano, he plays a song by the Beatles. Chomsky makes clever use of a Steadicam to the point that at times Garcia appears horizontally oriented, totally out of balance. Yet, at this exact moment, one thing becomes clear. Just like Norma Desmond, Garcia is finally ready for his close-up and performs in a dramatic, desolate way, gesturing before an imaginary crowd. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for these excellent presentations. I have a question for each of you, and after that we can move forward to open the floor for everybody to comments and to ask other questions. We have until 3, so I think we have a lot of time for this part. First, Justo, I would like to know your perspective on the differences that you may find between Vampires in Havana and other films from the period that also reposition popular music in Afro-Cuban rhythms. For instance, I'm thinking in Los Pájaros Tirando la Escopeta with Los Bambán singing the song Y tú qué crees, the timba song, which is very important. And also then Anessé Rodriguez in Pataquín from 1982 singing La Caimana. I think it's a very important point of contrast. For Carrie, I would also like you, if possible, because I have heard other interesting conferences from you, so I think it will be interesting to know more about how do you envision that this commodification of Latin America is also being portrayed in other films of the period, for instance, Saludos Amigos from 1942, and also another film that you have studied before, A Weekend in Havana from 1941. Juan Carlos, Juan Carlos, I have for you, to what extent do the music videos converge with or diverge from other Puerto Rican musical responses to this case? I was thinking, for instance, in the example of the late Hector Tito Matos and the Plana for George Floyd. Do you remember the lyrics of the Plana and how in which the political work of this Plana is carried through sound and collectivity rather than the visual reenactment that we can perceive in the video. So I would like to know more about how this could be repositioned from this perspective of this particular genre. And for Hector, meanwhile, I was watching the first film, and I found very interesting this idea of the musician as nurturing the nation. I was also trying to understand in Lo que vendrá, and I want to ask you, how does the film complicate this idea of nurturing when, as you mentioned, the musician is also a figure that is also the representation of coercion and violence? And what does it tell us about the director reading of the democratic transition in Argentina? I think you have explored that in your essay, but when I watched the film and with your Astra in mind, I was thinking about those ideas. So thank you very much, and if you want to start, go ahead.
Oh, okay, by order. I'm just going to try to answer the question. It's a very complex question, but Vampiros in La Habana is a film from 1985. In the late 1970s, started a new period in cinema, in Cuban cinema history, that is known as the period of popular films. Those were films that were not that played into comedy mostly, not only comedy but musicals. For example, at the end of the period, we can find films like La Bella de la Alhambra, which is a musical. But most of the films were genre films, as opposed to more author films in the 60s and the 70s. And this is the result of many factors. Among them, the end of the presidency Alfredo Guevara in the ICAIC, and at the end of, as a result of the scandal of Cecilia Valdés, which was one of the one of the films that tried to answer very complex questions like what is to be a Cuban, what are the origins of the nation, and to connect all of that with a revolution. Those films in the 60s and the 70s, the best known films in the 60s and the 70s, try to grapple with those questions and answer those questions through big epics, like from the very beginning, the history of the revolution to Cecilia Valdés. So in many ways, Vampires in Havana belongs to this popular film period in that sense. However, one of the elements that differentiates, and you see the presence of popular music in films like Los Pájaros Tirando la Escopeta, that you mentioned, the presence of Bamban for the first time in that film, and Pataki, and many other films. However, in comparison with those films like Los Pájaros Tirando la Escopeta, Vampires in Havana tries to answer those big questions that Tomás Gutiérrez Alea and Humberto Solás were trying to solve in the 60s and the 70s. And that is something that differentiates Vampires in Havana from Los Pájaros Tirando la Escopeta, which is a comedy. It's a film that is made to enjoy, for the audience to enjoy, and it's not preoccupied with those. It's not trying to retell the epic of the revolution or the epic of Cubans. Vampires in Havana does try to do that, but what I find interesting about this film is that it tries to do it from the perspective of genre film, and not from the auteur film, and it tries to do it by connecting with the popular audience, but by using formulas that are very well established within Cuban narrative in general, from the theater, from the vernacular theater, and were rejected to some point by directors like Tomás Gutiérrez Alea and Humberto Solás at the beginning of the Cuban revolutionary film. So that's what I find interesting about Vampires in Havana, despite being a film from that period.
Thank you, Rosali, for your question. So how does the commodification of Chiquita Banana align with other characters in Carmen Miranda, Weekend in Havana, or even Saludos Amigos? So this is the first time I present about commercial jingles. This is a project that is coming out of my research on Carmen Miranda, actually. And in my chapter, I write about 3 different stages of music in the early 20th century in sound film, and it revolves around the 1930s rumba craze. Then I go into the good neighbor policy, and then I end with the mambo craze, and I look at the movie Guys and Dolls for the mambo. So yeah, I think like it seems like if you compare the Chiquita Banana with other characters in film, and you consider maybe the dichotomy of like highbrow versus lowbrow, maybe the commercial is more lowbrow than the films, in that it has to do the same commodification work in a shorter amount of time and with a particular cartoon icon. But it still is very similar how music is presented. I would say that in the rumba craze, there was probably less distinction between genres of different countries in Latin America. And then during the good neighbor policy, we start to see more concern for representing different countries with specific genres, like like samba in Brazil, right, or rumba, or in Cuba. However, if you think about the movie that you mentioned, Weekend in Havana, you have Carmen Miranda as a character of Rosita Rivas, but she never sings in Spanish. She only sings in Portuguese and broken English, right? So there is a misrepresentation there of what Cuba is in that film, and it doesn't seem to matter because the U.S. audience probably won't notice anyway. But it's interesting that here they really make a point of pointing out the calypso for the Chiquita banana, even though it's not really one of the main countries where you see the banana being exported from, right? So I think it still is having the same function of giving it this sort of like vague type of representation rooted in some kind of like mythic Caribbean atmosphere, even though they are saying it's a calypso, right?
Thank you so much for the question, and also thank you to the organizers of the event. I was so nervous and wanted to go so fast that I forgot to mention that. Thank you so much, Justo, Juan, and Reynaldo. I'm going to say something before answering the question. I was trying to look at the representation of the police in Puerto Rican music videos, and one of the things that I was more fascinated by the things that I encountered is that when it comes to just depictions of the police not involving race, not involving racial profiling, and not involving necessarily police brutality, these representations tend to go into songs and the video operates as an added visual layer that is full of ambiguities. It really doesn't have much to do with the song, topic, or anything. When it comes to stories about racial profiling, police brutality, harassment, the video tends to illustrate the story that is told by the song. This is the case of Señor Oficial, and it's also the case of Sin Aire, I would say. On your question that I think is fascinating, and I look at this at some point, and I was considering adding this to the presentation, but it became too big and too many materials that I found. But I think there were two types of responses to the George Floyd's murder in Puerto Rican music. One coming from hip-hop artists, just like the one we saw with Rafa Pavón, but there is also one by Mike Towers called Michael X, in which he impersonates brother Malcolm X, and it ends the video with dramatizing the assassination of Malcolm X. That is a very interesting way of portraying this story. But what I see is that in these videos coming from the hip hop artists, the attention on them, on their power to embody the story of George Floyd and the story of racial violence has also to do with branding. It has also to do with bringing attention to the performer. It has to do with, how this song could eventually become viral. It could reach other audiences and all that. When we look at responses to the George Floyd assassination coming from the bomba and plena genres, which are more collective, performed by groups, the branding question is not there. Therefore, what you see is a more community response to this tragedy. And one of the things I need to revisit Tito Mato's Plena, but one of the other videos that I saw is it was a bombazo para George Floyd in Loíza, which is a town of bomba music, and how the community went out and performed their dances. And in Bomba, these collective gatherings have also a healing aspect to it that is very important. Thank you.
Before we get to Hector's response, I want to invite the students to also have a chance to ask questions, maybe brief questions. We'll collect questions just to give brief responses as well, being mindful of time. So any questions first from students, if not from the audience as well. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Maddie, and I'm a senior psychology and Spanish student in Professor Ramos's Latinoamericano class. And my question is for Juan Carlos sobre the idea of using music videos and visual art as kind of like an outlet in particular to provide this political commentary from Puerto Rico about this relationship you were kind of talking about in the conclusion between Puerto Rican and Black identities. So if you wanted to comment a little bit about that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Hello, my name is Katrin. I'm a bio major, and I'm in Professor Lastre Lavra's class. And my question is for Carrie. I wanted to know if you've explored more of the hypersexualization of Latin women in American media. For example, Sofia Vergara in Modern Family, things like that.
Hi, my name is Emma, and I'm also in Professor Ramos's Latinoamericano class. My question is for Justo Planas about vampires in Havana. I was very interested when you talked about how it's an animated film, so I was wondering if you could comment a little more about that and why you think it was made to be animated.
Hello, my name is Erin. First of all, thank you all for being here. This was very enlightening. I'm also in Professor Ramos's Latinoamericano class, and my question piggybacks off of Maddie's about using music in music videos as activism and political commentary. And I was wondering if you guys had seen Bad Bunny's Super Bowl halftime performance, or have, paid attention to like his music and his commentary, and what role you think that is playing, especially in comparison to, what we were talking about from 30, 40 years ago. Thank you.
If you want to address those questions, there's a lot there. Briefly.
I could very quickly mention that I think it's very interesting to see how Puerto Rican hip hop has always been associated with its origins in the Bronx in New York as a diasporic community living in the Bronx. Puerto Ricans and African American kids from the area were joining forces to create this music. And in Puerto Rico, it has had that impact that has created bridges between these two communities. So when hip hop artists have been the target of local policies, sometimes they think about in ways of responding to power that are very similar to the responses we have also seen among African American performers and communities. So there is a space of conversation that is open in hip hop that is very fluid, but at the same time, race constructions, racial discrimination and violence is somehow very different in Puerto Rico and in the US. So there are also some cultural nuances of how discrimination operates in both societies. On the question of Bad Bunny, I think collective intelligence also hallucinate, not only artificial intelligence hallucinate, collective intelligence hallucinate as well. And I'm gonna give you an example. People wanted to deal with the trauma and the concerns created by the presence of ICE in Minnesota. What people did, they identified the kid that appeared in the Super Bowl with the migrant kid who was taken into ICE custody. If the audience is hallucinating that, it's because it is expressing a desire of seeing music as a platform for advocacy for communities. At the end of the day, we realized that the kid was not Liam, that Bad Bunny was trying to represent something, but the audience taught us something. We desire to see these representations and to see these bridges happening in our spectacles. So I think that's a very powerful lesson.
Okay, it's an animated film, which makes it very, very weird and atypical, right? If you think that it is difficult in Latin America and the Caribbean to produce films at all, because it is a costly, very costly art, is an industry. You can imagine how difficult it is, or it has been, to create animated films in Latin America and particularly in the Caribbean. So that requires a studio, that requires a very organized industry, and that is one of the achievements of Cuban cinema. I have to recognize that Cuban Institute dedicated a studio for animation. But there were a lot of prejudices behind that. So Vampires in Havana is the result of decades of work. The prejudices like animation was tied to the production of didactic films, to propaganda, sometimes political propaganda, but also to illustrate health advertisement, for example. And also there was another trend of films later within that animation studios of ICAI dedicated, that created films for children. So animation was tied to that didactism and children. However, the presence of Juan Padron, who was the director of Vampires in Havana, changed all of that. He started doing short films that became very popular. They were addressed to children, that became very, very popular among all Cubans. And he created a Cuban hero known as Elpidio Valdez. All Cubans know Elpidio Valdez. He's a Cuban character, Cuban hero that represents the Cuban in arms against Spain during colonial times. And he started creating those films, but I had the opportunity to interview him many times when he was alive, and he told me that he always had in mind creating a film about vampires, and he had that in mind, but it sounded very weird to the people in power in Cuban cinema and in Cuban culture at large, because it was vampires. How was he going to connect vampires with the history of Cuba and all of that? So he proved himself by creating these films about Elpidio Valdez, this Cuban hero. By the way, he has a largometraje that takes place in New York, in 19th century New York, featuring Elpidio Valdez, and you can watch it on YouTube. But these films that he created about Elpidio Valdez became one of the most watched films every year, and that opened the door for him to create Vampires in Havana. It has two parts, one in the 1980s, and another one that was created by the Spanish Academy in the 2000s.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your question. So the question was about hypersexualization of the modern day Latina, maybe diva. I actually taught a class about 2 years ago that was called Latina Divas in Hollywood, and we dealt a lot with this topic, and I think maybe the trope that kept coming up the most was the musical hybridity that these figures were representing. So if you think back to the Chiquita banana, there is the unfamiliar that she is presenting, maybe the banana as an exotic fruit. But there's also, it's done in a very safe environment with this cartoon that is also somewhat welcoming or familiar to the audiences seeing the commercial. And I think many times this is what's happening, is that the familiar is presented with the unfamiliar, maybe musical styles that are popular in the US combined with something new. So I think about figures like Selena, for example. And if you think about her music, it had this agency or subversive force because she's entering the Tejano scene, which is a very masculine-dominated genre, as a woman. So it's almost as if they serve as vehicles for agency. And I would argue that many times the hypersexualization can also be a form of agency as well, because a lot of these, maybe like the older types of representation with like Lupe Vélez or Carmen Miranda or Dolores del Rio was very scripted, and it doesn't seem like they had much agency in how that was done. And I would say that the modern day Latina like divas do have more of that agency. And some of the figures that we looked at were Shakira, and how she was combining like Lebanese with cumbia, with US rock styles. So they really serve like vehicles for this hybridity of in culture, which is very interesting.
Las mujeres no lloran tour.
Yes. Well, first of all, to add to her answer, just because whenever they ask me where I'm from, the reference I always use is Sofia Vergara and Shakira. Shakira graduated from the school where my sisters graduated from, and Sofia Vergara is just a few years younger than myself, and we pretty much grew seeing her at the beach and just knowing she's going to go somewhere. But Sofia Vergara, basically what she does, she updates Charo. If you look at Charo, she updates Charo in a very intelligent way. Well, regardless, my question. If anybody has seen James Vanderbilt's film from last year, it's quite interesting. It's called Nuremberg. And it's the story of the psychologist who assessed Hermann Goering when he was captured at the end of the Second World War. And here I'm just going to spoil the film for everybody if you haven't seen it. It advances a rather interesting notion. And that interesting notion is that fascists, at least followers, are quite normal people. We love to demonize, otherize fascists because we think we dehumanize them, because we think they're some kind of monster. Turns out, if you are exposed to an ideology in a very concrete way as a society and culture for quite a long time, and the Germans have always had a very sophisticated culture, you internalize that logic quite easily. So the film is about that. The film, what it advances is they're not monsters. You have to understand that fascists are people like you and me. And to that extent, the nurse, and that's the problem I have with Lo que vendrá. I haven't developed it already. I've been thinking about it because obviously this is going to be something longer, and there was a limit to what I could read, right? But Lo que vendrá is a fascist film. And the nurse is a mirror image of the repressors. He calls people by phone. That was a technique used by the state. He follows the guy who's a repressor, and that was a technique used by the state. So he behaves exactly the same way, only from the opposite side of the political spectrum, which is quite scary. because people celebrate it and embrace it. But we have a very long record in Latin America of denial when it comes to celebrating fascist ideology. I remember when Volpe, the Brazilian film that showed the squad, the criminal squad in Rio that went after the drug dealers, and they have a notorious reputation for being murderers. I could remember you would go to Brazil to a movie theater, and the middle class audience would just root behind Volpe as though they were heroes. And I couldn't believe what it was. It was the entire theater just going gaga after people who were basically butchers. And Lo Que Vendrá, in The Nurse, played by Charlie Garcia. Well, Charlie it's not really his fault. He's nuts. He's gone. But the way he acts it and the way Mosquera set up the film, it's a validation of a fascist behavior against the repressors, which is extremely scary. And then you understand why the Argentines fell into the hands of such barbarians, because we all have a little barbarian inside us.
Well, thank you very much to all four presenters and our discussant. We have about 15 minutes for a quick coffee break, which is right upstairs. At 3:30, we have our keynote address. So please try to come back before then. Thank you again. A round of applause to our presenters.